many of you will know well, is one of the most respected and leading educationalists of the last 50 years. So Tim was head of the local education authority in Oxfordshire and also in Birmingham, a professor at Keele University. And this week, weren't we reminded of the impact Sir Tim had in London as we thought about some of the legacy of the London Challenge, as some of that data and information came out yesterday and the day before yesterday. Tim's work as a commissioner for London schools at a crucial time in which the city made huge strides in terms of its educational achievement and improvement, and a difference to the lives of many, many thousands of children and young people. So Sir Tim joins us this afternoon to help us reflect, but also to look forward. So Tim, it's my pleasure to welcome you. Thank you for joining us. I'm looking forward to hearing from you.
Michael, thanks very much. The danger of being a mystery guest is that sometimes you're so old, which is the case with me, that some people will say, well, who's he? Because their memory doesn't stretch back that far. And I was saying to you, Michael, just before we began, that when I left Oxfordshire in 1989, at the beginning of 1989, to go to Keele University, the 1988 Education Act had just come in. I'd had a row locally because I'd written an article in the Observer, which was headlined to First Steps on a Downward Path, and it was all about the over-centralization of power. That I feared the direction in which we were moving, because we were moving out of one age at that stage, which was of optimism and trust. Might have been misplaced, but it was misplaced, but it was one of optimism and trust, to a direction which is a combination of markets, managerialism, centralization, curiously mutually contradictory, but nevertheless necessary. Because if you have markets in education, you get failure, then you need to intervene, and so on and so forth. And at the time, because I was crucially interested in school improvement, and that was very unusual then, I was crucially interested in it. I have been probably since the age of 10, when I changed schools and went from one school where I was a school phobic to another school which I really, really enjoyed, and reflected on, even at that age of 10 or 11, well, what's the difference between these schools? Why do they make such a difference to my life? So I was always interested in school improvement, and I wrote an article at that stage, which was, I think, for what is now Belmast. And I wrote this article, and it was all about, can the head teacher succeed where the education officer has failed? And so, focusing on school improvement, I was arguing, well, it's all shifted now, and it's down to the school head teacher. And I suppose I'm at the moment writing a book with Mick Waters. We're writing a book on, are we at a point, we've interviewed 12 secretaries of state and loads of other people, including leaders of maths. Are we at a point where we're into a new age, an age which isn't one of markets, centralization and managerialism, but is one that we need to carve out, one of hope, and one of ambition and collaborative partnerships. And I think that collaborative partnership is something new, something that we've stumbled on, because school autonomy used to rule the roost, hence my kind of, can the head teacher succeed where the education officers failed? If I were writing a paper today, it would be, can the leader of a multi-academy trust succeed where individual heads, school autonomy, and the previous manifestation of education officers and local authorities have failed? In other words, can you do something which we have somehow or other failed to do? And if you are carving out a new world, what ought you to be involved in thinking about? Yours is very clearly a focus on school improvement. You're going to be judged by that. Now, there may be a whole set of regulations which you have to observe, and that's a distraction, and you need to protect your schools as far as you can from the distraction of such regulation. But you are a manifestation of collaborative partnership. And personally, I think that you will see some changes. You'll become more accountable, less directed. You will have various changes, I think, in the very near future. But there are debates happening, and it's an opportunity to shape those debates. And let's make them debates which recognize the importance of collaborative partnerships. Now, when Mick and I are writing this book, we've kind of said, well, it's the teacher, that lovely Gino quote, where I've come to the frightening conclusion that it's what I do in the classroom every day that makes the difference. I can humor or humiliate. I create the weather. I create the climate. And the teacher, as Dylan Williams tells us, is something like 8 times more influential than the school effect. And then you are further away than the school. So what we ought to be doing is bending our efforts to optimize the chance that teachers can be making good weather. How do we do that? What are the ways in which we do that? Because necessarily, it seems to me that you are cast, as I was as an education officer and an authority, as necessarily, of course, the virtual world has made that particularly the case in the last year, but necessarily a remote leader. I don't mean that that's a good thing. I just say, well, that's a fact of life because you aren't there on a daily basis. So what can you do that is going to increase the likelihood of each of your head teachers, of each of your heads of department, of each of your heads of phase, making the weather good for the individual teacher, who after all affects the likelihood of whether youngsters are going to lead fulfilled lives and in the process contribute to the fulfillment of others. And if I were playing around with that as something that you need to think about, I'd say you need, I think, 5 qualities as a leader of a multi-academy trust. You need unwarranted optimism. Every day you're reminded of the kind of detailed interference of the things that can go wrong, whether it's what you've been discussing, cybersecurity, whether it's safeguarding, whatever it may be, regulation that on the pain, you know, I get bored with the number of times I seem to have to do a police check and produce 3 items of whatever. You've got to deal with a multifaceted set of regulations. And you don't want the teacher and the school distracted by too much of that. So you need to protect that. You need unwarranted optimism. So when disasters are happening, you just as a teacher would in a classroom, you're making sure that people don't see it as a disaster. You need to regard crisis the norm and complexity as fun. You need a bottomless well of intellectual curiosity, absolutely crucial. A complete absence of paranoia and self-pity. And finally, you need to be very, very good at finding gaps in hedges. Now, around about 15 years ago, I was asked to give a talk to a group in the Institute of Education in London, part now of UCL. And it was a celebration of the birth of a person who had died 15 years before. It was a man called Harry Ray, an educator who before the war had been a teacher, was a conscientious objector, and then joined the SOE and lived behind enemy lines and did acts of daring do. And after the war, and he was an amazing communicator, incidentally, a quality that trust leaders need above all else to be a really good communicator. He decided not to take a career in broadcasting and acting, but to return to being a teacher. And he was a teacher, head of a school, and then he founded the education department in York and went back to teaching in a classroom when I was in the ILEA in the 1970s. And a great friend, Harry Ray, an amazing man. And there's an extraordinary book written by his son that's out, Jonathan Ray, that's out and well worth reading. But Harry needed to get to gaps in hedges during the war, because how the hell would he have survived? After the war, in his job, he always used to tell me, find the gaps in the hedges, look to things that the government hasn't thought of yet, or now I do believe that you must find gaps in hedges. You're the ones that can do it, whether it's through exploiting the apprenticeship scheme in order to have fantastic CPD, to bring paraprofessionals on, whatever it may be. And incidentally, you'll have people within your organization that are damn good at finding gaps in hedges. So how about a gaps in hedges group in each multi-academy trust, even if it's virtual rather than real? Probably it should be virtual rather than real, in order that people can share ideas. That will be crucially important, but you're trying to set a culture that doesn't become so firm that individuality is scotched. You desperately need to be experts in culture, creating a culture that's good. And if you don't do that, you won't succeed. That was the problem with so many of us, that we didn't set the culture as well as we should have done. And so culture setting, creating a culture, absolutely crucial. I just want to finish, because I've had my 10 minutes and you've said it's more like half an hour. I want to finish by saying, there was one moment in Birmingham when we used to have a coach that came to see us, and always afterwards, he would, on our away days, he would come to me the following day. He never said a word during the meetings. If people could use him, they did. He was fantastic. And he gave me 2 sides of A5, and it was all about appreciative inquiry and problem solving. You'll probably be familiar with it. Appreciative inquiry is you identify what's good in an organization, and then you debate with somebody who will immediately say, no, it's okay, but you ought to see what we're going to be doing next. And you dialogue, and in the end, you decide on an action plan and facilitate it growing and spreading. And that's appreciative inquiry. It's working from what's good. And problem solving, you'll be familiar with. You identify a problem, brainstorm reasons, possible solutions, decide on action. And the paper by 2 guys, Cooper Ryder and Srivastava, said you needed 3 parts of appreciative inquiry for every part of problem solving. Appreciative inquiry created energy, problem solving necessary but used energy out. He devastated me, I have to say, by telling me I was a damn good appreciative inquirer, a very good problem solver, but the problem was that I solved the wrong problems. And there is a danger that we solve the wrong problems. So my plea would be, remember the teacher, make the weather. How do you make it good for them? And in their classroom, unless they're doing 3 parts of appreciative inquiry for every part of problem solving, they're not going to unlock the talent that they should in the classroom, and the school won't get better. I believe you know that. I think I found that it was really, really helpful to reflect on appreciative inquiry and problem solving and get the balance right. And incidentally, not do as the government occasionally does, which is lurch into enforcing compliance, knowing what's right, prescribing the same thing for everybody, inspecting and punishing the deviants. Try to avoid that. Thanks ever so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Sir Tim, and thank you for summarising the year for us, really, as we